Backstage in Palm Springs, where the desert meets the stars, with Jason Mannino.
Hi, Coachella Valley has always been a sanctuary for artists, but today it's a powerhouse. Between the world-class talent that calls the desert home and the stars who travel here to grace our stages, Palm Springs has its finger on a nationwide pulse of theater, cabaret, and the vibrant culture that makes this city legendary. We're bringing you intimate conversations with the people who make it happen. Let's go backstage in Palm Springs.
All right. Well, welcome to Backstage in Palm Springs, a place where the desert meets the stars. I'm your host, Jason Mannino, and today is a very special day for theater lovers anywhere, everywhere, and in particular for me. Our guest today is a titan of the musical theater, a Tony Olivier Drama Desk Award-winning composer whose melodies have defined the Broadway stage for well into 4 decades now, from the epic sweeping Ragtime, which is currently enjoying a massively successful Lincoln Center revival, to the whimsical heart of Seussical and the Caribbean rhythms of Once on This Island, and so many others. And for me in particular, this is a very special moment as I'm preparing to step into the role of Alfie Byrne in the musical A Man of No Importance at the Bent next month in May. So his music has been resonating with me on a daily basis for a few months now. It's an absolute honor to welcome one half of the Broadway composing and lyricist group Aaron's and Flaherty. Please, it is my honor to welcome to Backstage in Palm Springs, Stephen Flaherty.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you agreed to give me some of your time today. I think you said you were in Puerto Vallarta. Is that?
Yeah. We have a second home. My main home is in New York City. I'm right in the middle of Manhattan, and that's where I spend most of my time. But we do have a home, my husband and I, here in Puerto Vallarta.
Great.
And we've had it, I guess, maybe 12 years now. We just love it here so much. And actually, the new piece that I'm working on now is Mexican. It's set in Mexico, and I'm collaborating with a Mexican American band on it. And it's an adaptation of Laura Esquivel's novel Like Water for Chocolate. So,
Oh, wow.
so it's something I wanted to do for more than 20 years, and I've always wanted to be in a band, and I never have been. So I figured, okay, it's not too late. And
That's amazing. And
yeah, so I'm really like picking up a lot of the vibe, during my stay down here.
wow, well, you've already answered you've already answered two of my last questions. What's the one story you haven't told yet, and what's next? And there we have it.
Yeah. We just did what is known in the biz as a 29-hour reading, and for those actor friends of yours, they'll know what that means. That means basically that you're putting a draft of a new show in front of an audience in way less time than you need to do so. So
Yeah.
it was the crazy week of the blizzard in New York City when we did it just like a month and a half ago, and it went beautifully well. I'm very excited about it.
Glad to hear that. Looking forward to hearing more.
Mm.
I'm going to go ahead and dive in here. Your
Great.
partnership with Lynn Ahrens is now among one of the top, maybe one of two of the most enduring in theater history, going all the way back, of course. I don't need to tell you the BMI workshop in the early 80s. My question for you is, over those decades, how does your process evolve? Specifically, let's say in an epic like Ragtime and Anastasia, which I haven't mentioned yet. How do you decide when the music needs to lead, or the lyrics need to lead, or when one needs to take a little bit of a step back, or whatever that
Well,
looks like for you?
it's different all the time. Everybody seems to think that there's some magical recipe for creating a
Hmm.
song or a moment, like just add water, and that's really not the case. Usually, in our particular partnership, it's whoever has the most passionate idea who first starts, because there have been many instances of songs being music first. And my partner Lynn, she actually prefers music first, if I can do that. And it necessarily doesn't have to be like an entire tune. It can be you know, a piece of what I would call musical fabric that would give the idea of the tone, the melody, the harmonic, you know, language, and just something that creates an emotion, you know, really what the character may be feeling in that moment in time. So if I can come up with that, I try to. But she's come up with some wonderful lyrics first as well. And a lot of our shows have sort of larger musical sequences within them, and those we usually write together in the room at the same time because there's just so much involved. There's so much dramaturgy, architecture, you know, rhythm, you know, just everything. So those are things that we sort of like to roll up our sleeves and jump in together.
Yeah. And then
It's
there
exciting.
are shows like Dessa Rose, if I'm getting
Yes.
that right, that she essentially went ahead and you weren't
Oh.
feeling as inspired, and she
No,
kind of
no,
rewrote
no.
some of the libretto.
Yeah, you know that story. It was something that Lynn had felt very passionate about. It's based on a novel called Dessa Rose by Shirley Ann Williams, and she had been in love with it probably well more than a decade. Probably she kept coming back and circling back and me wanting to do this as a show. And I found it a very difficult read, frankly. It's a very densely populated novel, and it's the story of two women in antebellum South. But the big architectural problem is that the women don't meet until the middle of the novel. So the first half is Dessa, the second half is Ruth, who's the plantation owner, and it was. I just couldn't figure out how you would do it as a piece, but she was so passionate about it, and I said, you know, let's as an experiment. Why don't you take this, and it's so clear in your mind, but I can't get it. I said, why don't you just commit to putting it down on paper as if it were, say, a folk opera libretto? And if you can do that, then, you know, give it to me in an envelope. And I did. She gave it to me, and I took it away for vacation that summer. And I totally understood after reading it what that would be. And after a while, music started coming to me, and it was very very much about nature, about the land, about, you know, mysticism, and I would say it was an electrical storm, and all of a sudden all of these musical ideas started rushing to the forefront of my brain, and I just started going like page 12, and I would play a theme, page 17, play a
Wow.
theme,
Right.
and I worked on these themes and what I think it could be, and then finally I came back to the city, and I said get ready, you're going to hear 50 minutes of music you've never heard of before. And so that was very different way of working for us. You know, it was much more like sort of like how the opera world might work, you know, where you're setting basically a libretto. And then we wound up, you know, rolling our sleeves up and working together on the piece more like we normally do. But it was a great and unexpected way to jumpstart a new project.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing.
Amazing. Andre Bishop and Ira Weitzman were essentially, I would call them almost the midwives of your career, if you will, at
Very
Playwrights
much so.
Horizons, and then on to Lincoln Center. And with Andre stepping down this season at LCT, how do you reflect on the specific kind of loyalty or institutional loyalty that he's given you in some ways? And in
Well,
today's landscape, there's a
yeah.
place like that where a composer can start work and fail and get
I
back on their feet and really have that room. Does that
Yeah,
exist?
yeah. I think if you're lucky enough to have what I would call an artistic home, you know, just grab onto it and don't let that go. Because as a young writer, we actually did our very first show at Playwrights Horizons, and that's around
Bedazzled, I think.
sort of the mid '80s, and that's when I met Ira Weitzman and Andre Bishop for the first time. And Andre was the artistic director, and Ira was the director of music theater at Playwrights. And so our very first show, Lucky Stiff, was done there. And you know, as a young writer, you know, you're in a very vulnerable position because you don't have what I would call a track record yet. You know, you're working very hard over a long period of time on your show, and you know, it didn't occur to me that once shows go up, they come down, and after our subscription run at Playwrights Horizons, I thought, now what? And the beautiful thing is, Ira and Andre, they said, we're very much interested in hearing what you come up with next. Please bring it to us. Show us what you're working on. And it was such a vote of confidence, for a young writing team. That was our one show that we had produced in New York City, and the next show was Once on This Island, and that was also produced at Playwrights Horizons, and then it moved to the Booth Theater on Broadway. It became our Broadway debut. So I think a lot of that was because we had the support. And not only financially, I'm talking like emotionally and artistically, the support of that theater. And so whenever Ira and Andre moved up to Lincoln Center, we were developing our third show, which was my favorite year, and that became the first original American musical to be done at the Vivian Beaumont. And after all of these years, I think
Oh, wow, that was the first original show to be American.
original music, yes, original
I
American
know that.
musical.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and that was 1992. So here we are, like,
Hmm.
34 years later, and our show Ragtime is in the very same theater.
Yes.
So not only were we the first musical that Andre Bishop had with his tenure at Lincoln Center Theater, but Lear de Bessonet, our director of Ragtime, she's the new artistic director of Lincoln Center. So we're also the first musical of the next 30-some-year
Wow. Yeah.
regime, which is, not lost on us. It's an
No.
absolutely beautiful, unexpected arc.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's our fifth show there at Lincoln Center, and the second show in that theater. And it's first of all not only thrilling to be re-examining the show with these new audiences, but also it's such a beautiful return to Lincoln Center, and to that theater. So it's been lovely.
to
But
mention how.
really, yeah, but really, we do owe so much to Andre and to Ira, and it's like it's that fantasy that you have as a kid. It's like none of us know how to start careers. Basically, I had $500 in my pocket and show tunes, and that's all I had. And I came to New York on a bus. It's such a cliche, but that's how I got here. And I kept thinking, just do your best work every day, and one day somebody in the crowd will come up to you, a stranger, and will say, "Hey, I like those songs, kid. Do you have any more?" And I would say, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do." My entire everything was based on this made-up scenario, and that's literally what happened to me. It was Ira Weitzman. Lynn and I were presenting at an ASCAP workshop,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it was a very, very early show, and he literally came out of the crowd and said, "That was really something. Who are you, and do you have more?" And that was the beginning of our start with Ira and Andre.
That's a great story. That's a real, true.
Yeah, yeah, because there was nothing else to hang my hat on other than that, and that was enough. So that was good. Yeah.
And at Playwrights Horizons, I think I'm accurate in this. It was right around the time that James Lapine and Stephen Sondheim were working on Sunday in the Park with George, I think, when you
Well,
first.
that was around that period. I remember I was a member of the University of Cincinnati men's glee club. And so we came to New York whenever I was like probably 19 or 20. And that's the first time I was aware of Playwrights Horizons. And I was reading about a show called March of the Falsettos in New York
Uh-huh.
Magazine. And I didn't even know what off-Broadway was. No one wanted to go see this show with me. So I saw it by myself. And I was fascinated not only by the subject matter and then like what you can make a musical out of that, but the whole vibe of the theater. And I loved it so much that I literally bought a ticket and came and saw the same show the next night. I saw it two nights in a row, and I said to myself at that point, I said I'm going to work here one day, and I just knew I was, and I had set my mind to it, and. So as we were working on our early shows, that was Lapine and Sondheim then began working on Sunday in the Park, and
Was
actually
there any, did you cross paths? Was there any
yeah,
influence with
yeah,
Sondheim? Or?
he was the first person that I called on the telephone in New York once I had a telephone. We had these landlines, and I was living in Brooklyn, and I had gotten his number. I don't want to say how I got it because it sounds like stalkerish and weird, but I was like a very shy kid, but I really wanted to understand how one would go about having a career as a composer. And I thought, well, who would know better than him? So it turned out that a friend of mine who was playing Petra the maid in Little Night Music at
Uh-huh.
our college wrote him, and he wrote her back. And so I started writing, and I said, I'm coming to New York uh, this September, and I'd like to be a composer, and I'd like to meet you, which for me was like brazen to go that far. And he said, sure, here's my number, give me a ring when you're in town. And that was literally the first phone call that I made on on my landline, and it was the first call that came in on that landline. And it was like, what are you doing next Friday at 3? And of course, this is back in the day when we had those paper books, remember, before everything was digitized. So I had like one of these scheduling paper books with nothing in it. It was totally all blank pages. I had no prospects, and I said, "Oh, let me check." And I like literally put the phone down on Sondheim, and while I'm making the sound of pages flipping, and I said, "Oh, that's good. That's good. Yes, I can make that." And that was our first meeting, and he was incredibly generous to a stranger, because that's who he is and that's what he's about. And
Yeah.
and yeah, and he helped me, and then helped later Lynn and myself, and he advised us on our early projects, and there was there's a theater exchange that was international. And I got a call out of the blue about that. I had never been anywhere. I had never traveled. I was very much like Harry Witherspoon and Lucky Stiff. And it was to Bulgaria, Poland, and Hungary.
Oh,
And
wow.
and it was like you would be with six other theater makers, and one of them, they wanted to have a composer, they wanted to have a music person, and I said, how did you find my name? And they said, oh, Stephen Sondheim gave it to us. So he was like in the shadows helping me along even when I didn't know that he was. So he was an extraordinary artist, and helped so many people, and we're lucky that we shared some time on the earth with him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. When you're composing, is there at times a specific motif or a find, if you will, that unlocks the entire show? For instance, maybe the instrumental
Yeah.
palette for Men of No Importance, or the rhythm in Once on This Island, and then
Well, for ragtime, I don't know if you know that this is part of like theater lore, but we had to audition to get the show, to get
yes,
the
I do know that. Yep.
yeah. So there were
Blindly,
maybe
they
like
didn't know
10.
who was who when they were listening to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I thought, what a great opportunity. I mean, at that point, we had already had two shows on Broadway, so a lot of my friends said, like, "Aren't you insulted that you have to audition for this show?" And I thought, no way. I thought this is the kind of show that I wanted to write my entire life, and to have the opportunity. And also, there was nothing that we had written that was remotely like it. So the job was to prove that you could, and that you were the right writers for it. And with that, it was, well, we only had 11 days to write these songs, arrange them, record them, and mix them. Because we had to write 4 songs on spec. So that's what we did. And and we were in different countries. Lynn was in New York, and I was in London working on the Once on This Island cast recording at Abbey Road. So we were in different places, literally. And so just to do it, because I thought, this is too good, we cannot turn down this opportunity. We decided 2 songs would be written lyrics first, 2 songs would be written music first. And the first notes that I wrote for Ragtime were the very first notes in the show, the little piano motif.
Mm, yes.
And I sat at my piano, and I sat, and and Terrence McNally also had written a 65-page treatment of
Hmm.
his take on what the show would be. And so his opening image was the little boy from New Rochelle standing next to an Aeolian piano that was being played by Colehouse Walker Jr., the black
Hmm.
ragtime pianist in our show. And he described what the music sounded like, and it was a passage from E.L. Doctorow's novel, which was about small, clear chords, and that's we use that speech later in the show. We use it in during a piece called New Music, and I thought that's what it needs to sound like, and I just sat there and I sat there, and I think my problem was I put myself in the character of Coalhouse Walker, and I thought, well, I'll wait to see what he plays, and then nothing was coming up, and I realized I put myself in the wrong character. I should be the little boy, so I put myself in the character of the little boy, and I just waited for Coalhouse to play, and when you're playing at a baby grand piano, there's a mirror image. So so it was my hands, but in fact there were another pair of hands. They were Coalhouse's, and I stared at those hands, and I just waited, and then those first notes came out, and the entire score was based on that. So it's like it looks like you're not doing anything, and it looks like you're just like being lazy and not doing anything in your workroom, but in fact you're waiting for the correct notes to make an appearance, and that's like the divine part of composition that has nothing to do with me. I don't know where those kinds of musical ideas come from, but I know
through you.
they come through me, but I don't know that I'm the idea person. I think it comes from elsewhere personally, but yeah, but those notes, the entire score then was built upon that. So yeah, so you hope that you find those right notes, and you hope that you find them early on. So yeah.
You mentioned how ragtime was so distinctly different from anything that you have done before, and I think, in my knowledge of your canon, there isn't a lot of musical commonality. Like I don't think you listen to an Ahrens and Flaherty show and say, "Oh, that sounds like that's this." But there are a couple of commonalities I think that I've noticed, and one of them is there's this striking commonality from Once on This Island to Knoxville, and now Alfie Byrne in A Man of No Importance, which is this framework of something along the lines of a narrator or the storytelling framework. And I'm curious to hear from you what I think, is that something that you consciously keep returning to, or that just pops up, or how does that?
Well, so one of the things that I love about theater is that it is a group effort, like I came into this at a very young age, and I came into it because I wanted to do something with a group of people. It wasn't about like me being a solo artist ever. It was about getting a group of people together and creating something as a group. And I think that that's always what I've been about. And I think that that's sort of what the kind of theater that I enjoy the most is about. And so I really try to build these communities and worlds. And I do not like to repeat myself. I have really wide-ranging musical interests. I always have, and so each show I try to make it very personal. I try to make it so one song that you've written for one piece cannot necessarily be taken out and used in another. Each piece has their own defining fingerprint. And so I'm interested in that, and I think the idea just of storytelling, I think that probably developed from the group aesthetic that Lynn and I are interested in, because I know Dessa Rose is about oral history, and our latest show, Knoxville, that we did at the Oslo Rep Theater, that's about memoir, and it's about taking difficult things that happen in one's life and trying to turn them into something artistic and something of use and something of beauty. So that's really about that. There's a lot of creators in ragtime. There's a composer, a ragtime pianist. There's a filmmaker, Tata, and so I think all of that is. I think it's just what we're interested in. We're actually working on another side project besides our Mexican project, and that's about a writer as well. It's so. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's just what interests us and what comes out, and a lot of it you don't plan. You just see what comes out. So if you think that there's some grand design to most of this, there isn't. Other than usually when we're looking for a project, it's based on what we have just done, and so in other words, we don't want to do anything remotely like that. We did Seussical of all things after Ragtime, so we had done this very heavy, dramatic historical piece where our leading man got shot every night in the oops, spoiler alert, in our in our final scene. And I just said to Lynn, I said, I think we should really kind of lighten up a bit, because it was a lot of dark material to carry around for a long time. And so we decided we would do a comedy, and we wound up doing Seussical, which, if you think about it, the ending is very close to the ending of Ragtime, except somebody doesn't get shot. It's about a nuclear family and a found family, and how that found family is formed, and and we knew that was going to be the end of the show, and we both thought that that's really worth writing about. It was important to us.
And then with Terrence McNally, you went from this epic panoramic scale of Ragtime
Yeah.
to something so much more intimate, internal and more internal, if you will.
Yeah.
Since it's a man of no importance, what did that epic experience of Ragtime teach you that informed a show like Man of No Importance?
Well, we loved working with Terrence, working with him on Ragtime. It was the first time we'd ever worked with him, and we were really fortunate that when we were doing Once on This Island during the run, we got this lovely fan letter from Terrence, each of us, on a little card, and it was so beautiful. And basically, my takeaway from that was, you're the real thing. You're a real writer. And coming from Terrence, who I had not even met, I only knew his work. And so I took it and put it on a little cork board, and I had lived there on that cork board for a year and a half, which is how long it took to get the next project rolling.
Wow.
And it got me through a lot of personal doubt. I kept thinking, like, is this how it all ends? Like, there's nothing happening right now. And sure enough, 18 months later, that was when we got the opportunity to audition for Ragtime, and then we began working with Terrence, and it was a wonderful experience. We just loved him, adored him. So we wanted to work on another show, and he said, well, there's no way that we're ever going to do anything that big, so let's go to the extreme opposite. And this comes off my comment about what we follow things with. We had worked on such a huge scale on Ragtime, and we wanted to make this a very intimate character piece. And Terrence asked me point blank. He said, "What kind of music are you interested in? What would you like to write for this?" And I said, "Well, based on Ragtime, as you know, all the Irish people in that are basically the villains." And I said, and what literal Irish music I had was cut. And my parents, were Irish Catholic. They were like upset, like, why aren't the Irish people singing? And I said, I would like to do a show about Irish people. I would like to have that quality. And I said, I don't know what the subject matter would be. I said, I don't think we want to do another period piece like the Potato Famine, the musical. I don't think we want to do that. And Terrence came across this little indie film, which, believe it or not, I had actually seen. I think I'm the only person besides Terrence that had seen it, called A Man of No Importance, with Albert Finney, Rufus Sewell, and Brenda Fricker, and Michael Gambon. And he said, there's something very touching about this story to me, and it's also about the creation of theater, and we thought it could be wonderful. I found that one of the hardest pieces for me to write personally, though, because our main character of Alfie Byrne, as you know, he keeps his cards very much close to his chest, and he doesn't express himself freely. And so
yeah, which is a question of mine. Is like, how do you write music for somebody like that?
You can't. Yeah, I couldn't write it. It seemed like a good idea on paper, and then we started trying to write it. And I said, can we call this a play with music? Because the music doesn't seem to be coming forth, and I'm not sure why. And I think the reason was because of the main character. And the thing that changed everything for me was Terrence added a scene, and his scene was with Oscar Wilde and Alfie Byrne in a scene together having dialogue, and that scene is not in the film. It's something that Terrence did, and it just happened one week. We would get together every week, so like one week I walk into his living room and he says, here's the scene, and it was that particular scene. And once Alfie had somebody to confide in and to talk to and to let it off his chest, I was able to write really quickly. I mean, it was very strange because I couldn't write at all, and then all of a sudden it was really flowing because of that scene. And
Yeah.
and Terrence never asks to hear a song twice. Like through Ragtime, we would go, here's Back to Before, great, and then he'd be on to the next thing. And I had written with Lynn a song called "Man in the Mirror," which is from this first scene with Oscar Wilde and Alfie Byrne. And out of that scene came the song, and Terrence hit his fist on the table and he goes, that's it, that's our show, that's the sound of our show, can I hear it again? It's
Oh,
the
wow.
only
Okay.
time he's ever said that. Yeah.
And for me as an
He
actor
was
working on
really
this character,
excited about it.
I was looking at these questions, my questions last night, and reading that about
Yeah,
that struggle and how Oscar Wilde brought it forward, and then the discovery that I made, maybe a little late in the process, but I was like, wait, Alfie's most intimate moments in this show are with Oscar. The most real, intimate, authentic moments are with Oscar.
that's right. That's right. And they didn't exist in the film script. And as we began working with Terrence, they didn't exist there either. And we were lucky that with Man of No Importance, it was the first musical that was directed by Joe Mantello, who's a
Yes,
wonderful
yes.
director. And this was
Yeah.
before Wicked, mind you. Wicked was his second
Yep.
musical. So Joe was great, and the entire last sequence he helped us with that in terms of the formation of it. And and I like to think of like dramaturgy and in the musical architecture of things, and he helped us with the opening number and he helped us with the final number, and he was great. And at that point in his life, he was living with a wonderful playwright, and I for sure thought that they were discussing our show over breakfast and that he would come in with all these great ideas. And I even asked him that later, and he said, "Oh no, no," and he thought it was funny that he had great instincts and he would come up with these new ways of looking at the characters or the scene. And we had been living with the show and writing it probably 2.5 years, and he was bringing ideas we had never thought of. And I thought, how is that possible? But I guess that's a good director right there.
That's the collaborative spirit.
Yeah.
When the
Yeah,
right people are
absolutely.
together, inspiring each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing the Ragtime revival today, it's clear how your collaboration with Terrence Malick kind of redefined in some ways how musical theater characters share their internal lives, I think.
Mm.
How do you reflect on his specific influence on that work and how those characters, storytelling of those kinds of characters and the internal life that they have?
Yeah, well, we wrote our 4 songs first, and then we were able to join him in the clubhouse. So the 4 songs that we wrote, just so you know, like how it started, were the opening number, the end of Act One, which is Till We Reach That Day, a song for Tata, which is a character-driven song called Gliding, and then a song for Evelyn Nesbit. And in the novel, she has an affair with younger brother, so that plot line didn't make it into our draft. But once we had those and we knew kind of what the show might sound like, because that's the most important thing, even before you do character work. We sat with Terrence and we decided who were the main characters, because there were so many characters in the novel. And we decided that the 3 main fictional characters would be our leads, Mother, Tata, and Kohlhaas, and that all of the historical characters like Evelyn Nesbit, Harry Houdini, Emma Goldman, that they would act sort of like satellites and go around these main characters and sort of comment on their situation or somehow be embedded in what they were about. But once we decided those 3 characters, we started working in earnest with Terrence, and we started working chronologically, which isn't something we always do. So we literally worked scene 1, and he wrote scene 1, and gave it to us. And it was like it was as if somebody gave us a big gift. It was all about father leaving for the North Pole with Admiral Perry. Mother is not allowed to go because women are not allowed to go on adventures. You know, they're expected to stay at home. So that was her situation. And so, and he wrote the words, "Goodbye, my love, God bless you, and I suppose bless America too." And I thought, well, that sounds like a lyric, and I set that to music, you know. And then Lynn wrote the rest of that lyric, and then it segued as one into a scene where there's father and he's leaving New York Harbor as another man is coming into the harbor, who's the immigrant Tata, and I thought that was an amazing. I thought that could be. I didn't know how in God's name you would stage that, but I thought this is really interesting, and I was trying to find what's the common denominator between this character and this character. They're both incredibly different, and I thought it's the water. So I wrote water textures that are underneath all of everything that they sing, and they're sort of singing across the water to one another, you know. Projecting out that while the water, because I thought it's about everything is shifting. Nothing from this moment till the end of the show is going to be the same. Everything is shifting in all of these people's lives. And then the great surprise to me was like, oh, Mother like made a guest appearance in the middle of this song, Journey On. She become her starting point, which is a song called Goodbye My Love, becomes the bridge of Journey On. I could not see that coming. It just sort of announced itself.
Yeah.
And I thought this is really interesting because as a composer, I'm forming a triangle. And this triangle is the triangle that then takes off in the middle of Act Two. And that part, if you've ever seen the movie, that part of the movie makes absolutely no sense, you know, with that father, mother, and Mandy Patinkin is Tata. You know, that it's all of a sudden they're together and you don't know why. And I kept thinking, if we can put these three characters on a stage really early on singing together, the audience, even though they've not met one another, right. The audience is going to arrange them together in their minds. And so whenever they do meet in Act Two, it's going to have, and also that's the end of the show. That's where we're pushing towards. And so that one scene that Terrence gave us was so economical, and it gave us two whole songs, a great architecture. It made Act Two work. It did so many different things on so few pieces of paper. And his writing is just beautiful, and it's inspiring.
Yeah,
it sure is. It sure is. Going back to Man of No Importance, in songs like Love You Love, Alfie is mentoring Adele with advice he hasn't yet taken himself. Yeah. How did you use the music to show a man who's essentially rehearsing his own courage before he's ready to wear it in public?
Well, I think he's somebody that's lived life in externals. You know, he feels most comfortable when he's playing a character, when he's directing, when he's controlling a situation. You know, the director is the controller, you know, and he's much less successful, or doesn't even have the tools, frankly, to live a full life. And it's I think that's really the beauty of that moment. And when Adele Rice comes back in Act Two and sings to
back to
Alfie,
him. Oh my God, I can barely.
It's our original lighting designer of that production, Donald Holder. We worked with him many times, including Ragtime right now. He said that's my favorite moment of theater ever. You know, wow. He did the Lion King. You know,
wow, so, yeah.
And we just kept trying to make it so pure and so simple, and you know, we thought if it started with just a guitar, like a chord, it could be that, it should be that simple. And for Alfie finally at that moment to actually even understand his own advice, or to take those early steps to taking it in, and it's a moment we all love. You know, we just do. And believe it or not,
emotional just talking about it.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew this or not. We had a revival in New York City about maybe like a year and a half ago, or maybe two.
Oh yeah, Classic Stage. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Classic Stage, and it was John
Jim
Doyle,
Parsons.
who,
Yeah.
yes, yes, and we had never done one of John Doyle's famous actor musician shows. So we did it, and for that production, we combined the two acts into one. We actually made it into
Oh,
one.
yeah, yeah. I had heard that he wanted to do that.
Yeah, and we tried that, and that moment that you mentioned with Adele singing to Alfie, that was one of the cuts that John wanted to make, and I said, absolutely not. I mean, it's interesting because you have to know when you're being a good team player and when you're fighting for something that you believe is really important,
Crucial.
and why it's important. And I said,
Crucial.
here's why it's important, and he was not happy. but
That's interesting. That's part of
yeah,
that's part of telling the story. Anyway.
sure. No, no, no. I think that's why it's good working with all different people. They have different viewpoints, and they're not always going to be your viewpoint. And I just told the story of Journey On. Honestly, so several of my collaborators early on wanted to cut that song, and I just like went to the mat and I said, here's why I think we need it. And they wanted to get to the quote unquote plot sooner, which is like, oh my God, there's a baby in my backyard, that.
Right, 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 right,
That.
right.
Yeah. And I said to our director, Frank, I said, you need to weigh in on this. I said, or this song is going to be removed from our show. And I don't think it should. And Frank, God bless him, agreed. And, we had our moment in court about Journey
Yeah.
On and kept it, you know and so the way we kept it is, I won't say the name, but one of our fellow creatives said, well, if we can't cut it, can it go faster? So, and I said, faster it can go, yes, yes.
I
So
can
we
do
picked up the
faster.
tempo. Yeah,
I can
yeah,
do faster.
yeah.
I think you've already spoke to this a bit, but looking at, I think another of the commonalities in your work is kind of the outsider within the context of a village or tribe, a community. How does the orchestration define the weight of that community, particularly in what ways does, for instance, in Dublin, Ireland, make the social and religious pressure of that time in the 1960s feel physically present for the audience?
Oh, how do I make it feel real? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think that is the
Or
question. Yeah.
Well, I knew, I thought 1964 Dublin was a really interesting time, and it was one of the few shows that I worked with two orchestrators on. One was like the senior orchestrator, who is Bill Brown, who had done ragtime for us, and then he had brought a rock and roll protege named Chris Yonke onto the piece, and I thought it would be really interesting because the two of the main characters are an older man and a younger man. And I thought, what if we have an older man doing the classic Irish music and a younger man doing the rock and roll and the more music of the day. And so I brought them on because I thought that would make it feel really authentic because of who they are. And then in fact, they didn't follow that at all. It wound up being they worked. Their fingerprints were on every measure of the score by the end. So it wasn't what I had envisioned, where it was going to be, one person working on this, one person working on this. They both worked on it. But, I know my Irish Catholicism really well, because I was taught by the nuns for 8 years and then taught by the Christian brothers for 4 years. And I have an uncle who's a priest, and, that background. And I just knew it like the back of my hand. And I said, I really want to try to put this into a piece, everything I know about the good and the bad of my faith, and I want that to be in this piece. And I was hell bent on getting the confessional number right, and it took us 4 tries. It was Joe
Yeah.
Mantello saying,
It's one of the
"No,
most beautiful
it's
numbers in
right
the
there
show.
again." I love it so much, and we kept trying, and Lynn didn't know. She goes, "What happens in confession?" I said, "Well, a lot of things do." Yeah, I said, "But there's humor, and there's fear, and there's shame, and there's something that's larger than yourself." And we got to get all this in a 2.5 minute song, and that was like a real goal. I wanted to get that right, and I think I know a lot of the healthy and the unhealthy aspects of that. And I think Alfie, in the end, is probably the closest character to my own self. Because I, like Alfie, like to put on guises. I've never been a Caribbean peasant girl, but I wrote one fairly convincingly. And it's
Yes. Yeah.
but I think out of all the characters, I think Alfie's probably closest to my own self. I think.
Based on what I know, which isn't a whole lot, but the ending of the show, and I don't think I'm giving a lot away here, is pretty understated. After all of the drama and the heartbreak, you end on a pretty simple note. And why was it important to you and Lynn to finish off his story with a
Well,
sense of quiet
it's
and that community?
that developed in our rehearsals. A lot of that was Joe Mantello, because if you remember in the film, Albert Finney does this big like speech. It's like very
Yes.
histrionic speech in the middle of town, and he's quoting like
Yeah,
there's
he does.
love
He
that.
does the love that there. Oscar Wilde's love that dare not speak. It's name speech. Yeah.
Right. So there was another song that was written for that area of the show, and it was called "A Love That Speaks Its Name," and it was the melody from "Man in the Mirror" reharmonized in a major key, and it was a big declamation. And Terrence and I had to go to the Hamptons to raise money for our show, so we were not at rehearsal. Can you see where this is going? So Terrence and
Hmm.
I were like, shaking the cash from the trees,
Jeez.
out in from the old Hamptons money ladies, and that's where we were. And while we were doing that in our rehearsal, Joe started feeling that song was not right for our show. He said it feels like a big grand theatrical statement, and he said, and this is a very humble man, and he says, I don't believe he would sing that song. And he and Lynn were talking about the end of the show, and when we came back, what was suggested was very different, from before we had left to raise our funds for our little show. So when we came back, the notion that it should be a much humbler and a much simpler ending came, and then also the idea that we would do like a rewind of Alfie going through his day like he does at the beginning of the show, but without the joy and without Robbie being in his world, and that whole idea of bringing that back was really Joe's, and I love that idea. But then the final moment for Alfie, just the idea that a victory is a day that you get through, that's enough of a win, and that's the real win, is like, wow, I made it through a really difficult day, and I'm here to tell the tale. And that felt like that's where we wanted to go. And honestly, we had the great Roger Rees, and I was creating the role for him. We actually had Richard Thomas, believe it or not, who did all of our
I
developments,
saw
who
him
was
footage
wonderful.
of him doing a
He's
concert
great.
version
Yes,
with
he's
Jason
great. That's
Daniele. Yeah.
that's right. And he had never gotten to sing the score with the band, because whenever it came for us to be in production, Richard, I can't remember what he was doing, if it was a film project. Anyhow, basically he had triplets, and he had to put them all through through college, So, and I respect and get it. So he had to exit, and we brought Roger in, and Roger's vocal production was much more humble than
Yeah. I can see that.
than Richards was, and so just by who we wound up casting, that seemed like the right way to go too. So, and I don't know if I told you this, I actually, because I wanted to learn more about the character and I wanted to learn more about Roger, I became his vocal coach. So he came to my apartment every day for 2 weeks, and I said, we're gonna, because he was nervous about the singing. He was a wonderful, Shakespearean actor, but he was nervous about that singing. So I said, you come, we'll start measure one, and we'll go through it. And I learned, and here I thought I'm going to learn about the vocals, and about how to and where to place it in his voice. And I wound up learning so much about the character, because he would talk not only about vocal production, but now the character's feeling this, so he would probably be expressing this musical line this way. And I learned so much from Roger by going through the score with him.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and then by the time we got to the end, that end moment, it did seem like it didn't want to be like a big grand, show-stopping 11 o'clock number, but a more quiet one.
No, it's perfect. It worked. It works wonderful. Um, coming on to my final question before I sort of do our outro, if you will, as I prepare step onto that stage as Alfie in a few weeks, 3 weeks from tomorrow.
Ooh, that's exciting. Do you have all of
What?
that committed to memory?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I memorize early. That's the first thing. I mean, I don't.
It's hard. No, I know.
What is the one thing in 2026 that you hope an audience takes away from seeing a story like Men of No? What is the ripple that you hope this show is still
Well,
making, if you will?
I still think the show is about community, and it's about it's about loving and supporting one another, members of the community. Of course, we're all going to have differences. That's, I think that's why we work in different ways in the theater. I don't want to work with somebody who's me. I want to work with all different people. But I think it's really about supporting the community, supporting art, supporting something that I take very much to heart. The creation of music, the creation of art, the creation of beauty in an often hostile world. I think all of that. I hope the audience leaves with that, and I hope they leave feeling elevated. You know, this is not a good time for the arts, in general and specifically in this country. And I think, as our, as Mrs. Grace would say, as we artists, I think we have to double down twice as much and commit to it twice as hard, because I think the world needs it twice as much right now.
Even I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your heart with us today. As an actor, having the chance to hear the why behind some of the notes
Yeah,
is a gift I'll take right into rehearsal with me this
good.
afternoon. And for everyone listening, the Bents production, their first musical production of A Man of No Importance, opens May 8th through 24th. Come see the ripples we're making here in the desert. Stephen, thank you for the music and for
My
giving
pleasure.
Alfie Byrne a voice.
Great.
And if you remember, I asked you if you would mind staying on for 30 seconds and just kind of
Yeah.
maybe giving a message to the cast. So I'm going to take myself off the screen here, and then just as soon
Okay.
as I do that, feel free to.
Okay. And in your theater, just to make sure have it correctly, it's the Bent, the
Yes.
BENT. Oh,
Yep.
great. Great.
All right.
I was really touched when I heard that this is the first musical too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as far as musicals go, it's quite play-like. You know.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
But Stephen Rosenbaum, the artistic director and the director, yeah, it's been on his radar for a long time. So
Wonderful.
whenever you're ready, Stephen, if you wanted to.
Okay. Hi, I'm composer Stephen Flaherty. The well, let me do that again. I didn't know where I was going with that. Okay.
Thank you. It's really been my pleasure. Appreciate it.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, and happy opening. Let me know
Thank
how
you.
it goes.
I
Okay.
will. I will. Take care.
Okay, great. Thank
Bye.
you. Okay, bye.